Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 758, and today is February 14th, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. Gonna try to keep the show on the shorter side today. I think I'm finally getting over this cold after about all week of just not feeling that well. That being said, it's been a pretty busy week here. 3 episodes of Conflicts of Interest, 2 episodes of the Kyle Anzalone Show. I was also on It's Too Late with Alan Mosley and the Kelly Patrick Show. So Twitter, Facebook is the best way to kind of keep up with all the different episodes and shows that I'm doing every week. I know there's a lot happening. Be sure to subscribe at the Kyle Anzalone Show. We just need a few more subscribers so we could start monetizing that channel, and that will really help us out. So head on over to the YouTube channel and subscribe. It's the first link in the show notes page. Also, Libertarian Institute started our fundraiser, and so if you could head on over there and help us out, make a donation, that really is what supports the work I'm doing here, what pays my salary and everything. So let's get into the news today. First up here, and this is some good news. Trump, military spending should be cut in half. There's no reason to build new nuclear weapons. So President Trump told reporters on Thursday that he believes U.S. military spending could eventually be cut in half, and that he wants to pursue the idea as a part of agreement with Russia and China. He also said there was no reason to build new nuclear weapons. Trump said, "At some point, when things settle down, I'm going to meet with China, and I'm going to meet with Russia, in particular those two. And I'm going to say there's no reason for us to be spending almost $1 trillion on the military. I'm going to be saying we could spend this on other things. When we straighten it all out, then one of the first meetings I want to have is with Xi of China and Putin of Russia, and I want to say, let's cut our military budgets in half, and we could do that. I think we will be able to do that." So this is, I think, a really interesting and positive sign from Trump. Now, Trump will often say things that I certainly like, and there's never any follow through with them. And so I don't want to be too over optimistic here to come on here and tell you all that Trump is going to cut the military budget in half, that he doesn't want to build nuclear weapons. And I think we should all believe him. That's not exactly what I'm saying. I think we should remain skeptical. However, I think that, we should respond to this positively, because even if as a libertarian I would ultimately like to see the entire standing military disbanded, practically if we could cut the military budget from over $1 trillion to something more reasonable, that's really going to hem in what our foreign policy could do. Can you operate 800 bases around the world? Can you have projects like the F-35 and the new bomber project? I think it's a B-21, all the aircraft carriers, all the destroyers. It would simply be impossible. Even though there's a lot of corruption, there's a lot of theft, a lot of the military industrial money is basically looted and then funneled back to Congress and other members of the political class in the United States, the think tank class. But I think at the same time, a cut of half our military budget would require real rethinking of our strategy around the world. So that's the first good sign. The second good piece, I think, is that it would mean that the military industrial complex gets a lot less of our tax dollars, or at least gets them in not so great a quantities that they have the ability to fund all these think tanks, to fund all these politicians, to ensure that the military budget just continues to balloon out of control. And so I think this could be something that has actually some good positive feedback, where if you cut the military budget significantly, the military industrial complex is getting less money. That means they're able to lobby congressmen less. That means they're able to fund the think tanks less. And ultimately, that means there's less agitation for war on a daily basis in the United States of America. So I think this is, I was shocked. I almost couldn't believe it when I read this. I actually had to go and watch the clip just to make sure that Trump didn't say anything absurd or afterwards. But no, this was really fantastic. So the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, our SPIRI, in 2023 said the United States accounted for 37% of global military spending. China came in second, but was still far behind, accounting for 12% of military spending, and Russia was third at 4.5%. And so one thing I want to say on here that I think is maybe a positive is that Trump says he wants everybody to cut their military budget in half. Because this is a practical way to approach it. I think during Trump's first administration on the nuclear issue, he was trying to get China into a nuclear agreement with the US and Russia, but it didn't sound like that was going to be a proportional agreement. And the problem with that is Russia and the US have very large nuclear arsenals, and China has a very small one. We have thousands and thousands of nuclear weapons, and China has, I think, between 300 and 500 at this point. So the idea that, China would just agree to a nuclear arms control pact with the US and Russia when its nuclear arms compared to the US and Russia are already severely restricted was unlikely. And in that way, Trump sabotaged even talks with Russia because he said, well, I'm not going to talk to Moscow if Moscow's not getting Beijing in on the talks. And so that really harmed nuclear diplomacy during Trump's first administration. But him saying that we want to cut everybody's budget in half would be a great thing. The Chinese budget is about a third of the American budget, and then the Russian budget is about a third of that. And so if we're talking about proportional military cuts where everybody cuts 20%, 30%, something like that, I think that's something that could practically happen. Also got to mention here, we've run a lot of articles at antiwar.com over the years. The two names that really stand out to me on the list of people who have made pretty concrete proposals on how to cut the military budget in half are David Stockman and William Hartung, who have gone through and explained, like, these are places in the military budget where we could cut without really impacting U.S. foreign policy, and certainly not domestic U.S. All that much. So, discussing nuclear weapons, Trump said, there's no reason for us to be building new nuclear weapons. We already have so many you could destroy the world 50 times or 100 times over. And we're building new nuclear weapons, and Russia is building new nuclear weapons, and China is building new nuclear weapons. The U.S. has been working to modernize its nuclear triad, a project that is expected to cost at least $1.5 trillion. Trump also repeated his calls for denuclearization with Russia and said Russian President Vladimir Putin has agreed to do so in a very big way. Trump previously claimed he was pushing denuclearization with Russia and China in his first term in office, but the U.S. also withdrew from key arms control treaties during that time. And so Trump's first administration was really a massive setback for arms control, and particularly nuclear arms control. And it seems very obvious that had Joe Biden not won the election in 2020, despite all the other negative consequences of that, one very positive outcome was that Trump was not going to renew the New START treaty, and Joe Biden did it. Now that treaty is set to expire in 2026, so hopefully Trump has a much different perspective on it this time in office. So Russia said the outlook was not good for the state of U.S. arms control, as the last nuclear arms control treaty between the two powers, the New START treaty, is set to expire in February 2026, and there's currently no replacement. But Trump's talks with Vladimir Putin and the Ukraine war could lead to arms control negotiations. On the other hand, Trump also signed an executive order to build a major new missile defense system to cover the U.S. and its military bases, which Russia says could lead to a new arms race. And so one wonders if Trump really understands all the dynamics at work here, and if he really will be able to bring this war to an end. This next article is from the Libertarian Institute, and by the way, whenever you read one of my articles over at the Institute, consider hitting the support button on the top of the page. Make a donation to help us reach our goal. We don't do fundraisers very often, so when we do them, it's important that we hit our goals. All right, so this article I wrote on February 12th, Tulsi Gabbard sworn in as Director of National Intelligence. Gabbard was confirmed by the Senate for the post of Director of National Intelligence. Gabbard said the intelligence community has been weaponized against the American people. Gabbard was confirmed by the Senate on a vote of 52 to 48. Senator Mitch McConnell was the lone Republican to vote with the entire Democratic caucus against Gabbard. And as much as I want to attack Mitch McConnell for this vote, who knows if he even understands what he's voting for at this point. The man is in obvious, serious cognitive decline. And of course, we should all hate him for, occupying one of the 100 Senate seats in our country when he obviously is, probably won't be able to live at home alone. It's probably time for him to be in a retirement home, assistant care facility, or at least have, a full-time nurse to take care of him. And yet here he is shuffling around Congress, or being wheeled around Congress, and casting votes that are absolutely insane, because I'm sure he can't possibly understand all the dynamics going on in the world today, and who Tulsi Gabbard is and what she stands for. So Tulsi is a former Democratic Party representative and was the vice chair of the DNC. Gabbard split from the Democrats over a number of issues, including the war in Ukraine. During her swearing-in ceremony, Gabbard said, "Unfortunately, the American people have very little trust in the intelligence community, largely because they've seen the weaponization and the politicization of an entity that is supposed to be purely focused on ensuring our national security." Tulsi, like her new boss, Donald Trump, was accused of being an agent of the Kremlin, a charge often levied by Trump's first election opponent, Hillary Clinton. Following the election defeat in 2016, Hillary and the Democrats often blamed Russian interference for Trump's victory. Additionally, they accused Gabbard and Trump of being the Kremlin's agents or useful idiots. During her time in Congress, Tulsi was one of the most vocal critics of U.S. foreign policy and domestic spying. She often argued against U.S. wars in the Middle East that sought to overthrow secular dictators such as Syria. Additionally, Tulsi supported legislation that would have repealed FISA Section 702, which allows for the mass collection of Americans' data without a warrant. During her confirmation hearing, many senators were irate with Tulsi over her positions on Syria, Edward Snowden, and Section 702. Gabbard walked back her opposition to 702 and now says she supports the reformed law. However, she remains steadfast in her opposition for U.S. support for Syrian rebel groups that led to the overthrow of President Bashar al-Assad and Abu Muhammad al-Jolani's seizure of power in Damascus. Jolani is the leader of al-Qaeda's Syria affiliate group. Gabbard explained to the Senate that the CIA's Timber Sycamore program benefited groups such as Jolani's HTS. She said, when as a member of Congress, I learned about President Obama's dual program that he began really to overthrow the regime of Syria and be willing to, through the CIA's Timber Sycamore program that has now been made public, of working with and arming and equipping al-Qaeda in an effort to overthrow that regime, starting yet another regime change war in the Middle East. Every American deserves to know that people in our own government were providing support to our sworn enemy al-Qaeda. That should not be acceptable by anyone. And I couldn't agree with Tulsi more on that. All right, next up, let's turn our attention to Ukraine. Headset says no NATO membership for Ukraine or return to pre-war 2024 borders. So, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth on Wednesday dismissed the idea that NATO membership for Ukraine is on the horizon or would be a part of a peace deal with Russia, and said the goal to restore Ukraine's pre-2014 borders was unrealistic. Hayes says made the comments while addressing a meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group in Brussels. He said the United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. He said the Trump administration's goal is to end the war through diplomacy, which he explained must start by recognizing that Ukraine returning to its pre-2024 borders is an unrealistic objective. Chasing this illusionary goal will only prolong the war and cause more suffering. Restoring Ukraine's pre-2014 borders has been a war goal of Ukrainian President Zelensky although there have been signs in recent months that he's accepted that that's unrealistic. But he's still calling for security guarantees from the U.S. that involves the deployment of troops, which Hegseth also dismissed. He said, any security guarantee must be backed by European and non-European troops. If these troops are deployed as peacekeepers to Ukraine at any point, they should be deployed as a part of a non-NATO mission, and they should not be covered under Article 5. There also must be robust international oversight of the line of contact. To be clear, as a part of a security guarantee, there will not be U.S. troops deployed there. Until Monday, Russia's envoy to the UN said Moscow would consider any foreign deployment to Ukraine that are not under the authority of the UN Security Council legitimate targets of the Russian military. He explained, peacekeepers cannot operate without a mandate from the UN Security Council. Otherwise, any foreign military contingent sent into the combat zone will be recognized as ordinary combatants under international law and legitimate targets for our armed forces. Hegseth said the U.S. wanted to reduce involvement in Ukraine to focus on broader military buildup in the Asia-Pacific aimed at China, and claimed Beijing was a threat to the U.S. homeland. Hegseth explained, the United States faces consequential threats to our homeland. We must and are focusing on the security of our own borders. We also face a peer competitor in the communist Chinese with the capability to threaten our homeland. Hegseth also said going forward, European countries should be providing the majority of funding to Ukraine and push President Trump's call for NATO countries to increase military spending to 5% of GDP. So Trump then held a call with Zelensky, and I broke this down on the latest episode of the Kyle Anzalone show. So go check that out if you want to hear my thoughts, all my thoughts on the call. But now we have Zelensky's response. So Zelensky says it's not very pleasant that Trump spoke with Putin first. So Zelensky said Thursday that it was not very pleasant that Trump spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin earlier in the day before calling him. He said, we've already had 3 conversations with President Trump, so I don't take this call as a priority for Trump that he spoke with Russia first, although it's not very pleasant in any case. So as for the conversation, he knows my thoughts. I really believe that Ukraine is a priority first and foremost. There is a war against us. The call between Trump and Putin marked the first in 3 years that a leader of the U.S. and Russia held a conversation. After the call, Trump said the negotiations on the war would start immediately, and then he called Zelensky. The Kremlin said Thursday that Trump and Putin both offered to visit each other's respective countries, but a summit in a third country would happen first. I believe Trump suggested that that would happen in Saudi Arabia. So this seems, again, like a good sign. I know Zelensky's complaining, but I think his complaining shows that maybe he is not quite so important in the world order anymore, which means that the U.S. may engage in realistic negotiations with Ukraine. So while Hegseth was in Europe on visiting NATO, he went to the Ukraine Defense Contract Group. We already covered those comments. Then he met and did some press conferences in NATO. So Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said the U.S. will accelerate weapons deliveries in Europe. I wrote this one at the Institute on February 13th. Initially, the proposal was made by NATO Chief Mark Rutte and received mixed reviews from European powers. So on Thursday, speaking at a press conference alongside Secretary General Rutte, Hegseth explained, foreign military sales is something the United States is committed to expediting the process of and ensuring our allies get what they need when they need it. Under President Joe Biden, the White House worked to boost American weapons production capabilities to match the needs of his aggressive foreign policy that saw Washington flood weapons to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. However, the U.S. is currently unable to deliver weapons to its allies in a timely manner, and countries have found other sellers. Hegseth did not provide details on what steps Trump would take to try to ramp up further U.S. weapons production. Trump and Hegseth have called for NATO to massively increase its military spending. Currently, the alliance requires members to spend 2% of GDP on defense, a standard some nations fall failed to meet. Head has said multiple times during his trip to Europe that Washington wants its allies to spend 5% of GDP on the military. Head said claimed increased military spending and expedited arms production are needed to ensure we're able to meet the threats of the future, whether it's Russia on the continent or an ascendant China who has their own ambitions. Trump's policy will be a boon to the U.S. arms industry, which is already operating at capacity and reporting record sales. The plan for the U.S. to accelerate foreign military sales was first made by Rutte. At the time, European countries had a split reaction to the proposal. France sees additional U.S. arms sales as cutting into the European market, while Germany supports the plan. At a presser later in the day, Hegseth had harsh words for European countries, claiming they were not bearing their fair share of the bloc's collective burden. He said, Trump will not allow anyone to turn Uncle Sam into Uncle Sucker. So this has been a repeated complaint of Donald Trump. It'll be interesting. I don't think they're going to increase the collective GDP to 5%. I think they said they would negotiate for 3%. And so maybe that's what we will see happen. Overall, I think this is mainly just an arms sale. You know what I mean? This isn't about really a change in policy. It's just about selling more arms from U.S. arm makers. All right. This one I wrote for the Institute on February 12th. Ukraine attempts to enlist more young men with signing bonus. So as Ukrainian forces are struggling to hold back the Russian advance and Kiev faces a shortage of soldiers, the Defense Ministry is offering increased pay and signing bonuses to 18 to 24-year-olds that agree to enlist. Ukraine currently begins conscription at 25, a number American officials insist must be reduced. So on Tuesday, the Ukrainian Defense Ministry unveiled Contract 18-24 to encourage young Ukrainians to join the military. According to the statement on the program, those who enroll will receive a monthly contract of a contract worth $24,000, and volunteers will earn a monthly remuneration of up to $2,900. Currently, the average Ukrainian soldier receives about $720 per month, while frontline soldiers are paid $2,900. According to the AP, the offer risks vets seeing people already in uniform, as they're on the front lines, likely fighting and dying, and they're not getting these benefits. So the Defense Ministry said Contract 1824 will offer additional benefits, including zero interest mortgages, receive state-funded training, access to free medical care, including dental prosthetics, and have the right to travel abroad after completing 1 year of service. The statement adds, the law also guarantees a 12-month exemption from mobilization following the completion of the contract. So it's important to remember that being able to travel abroad would be a huge privilege for a man in Ukraine, because currently under martial law, anybody of, I think, the 18 to like 60 is not allowed to leave the country if you're a man, because they want to be able to conscript you and throw you into the meat grinder. So the program was released as Kiev is struggling to fill out its ranks, prevent desertions, and halt the Russian advance. U.S. officials from both the Biden and Trump administrations have said that Kiev should lower the conscription age to 18. Last year, the draft age was dropped from 27 to 25. While the number of dead Ukrainian soldiers is unclear, President Donald Trump has repeatedly claimed that millions have died in the war. On Wednesday, Trump posted on Truth Social he spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin about bringing the conflict to an end. And so it would be really great if, we bring that conflict to an end and we don't end up killing another, 100,000 Ukrainian young men, 18 to 24-year-olds, just beginning their lives and throwing it away needlessly in this war. All right, it looks like the hostage deal in Gaza is not going to fall apart. Hamas says it will release 3 hostages on Saturday, signaling the deal is back on track. So Dave DeCamp wrote this one for the 13th at antiwar.com. Hamas said on Thursday that it plans to release 3 Israeli hostages on Saturday, as agreed under the ceasefire deal, and Israel to have backed down on its demands for more captives to be freed. The Times of Israel reported that Israel is preparing to receive 3 hostages on Saturday, despite Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu backing Trump's threat that the genocidal war would restart if all hostages weren't released. Earlier this week, Hamas said it was postponing the hostage release, citing Israeli ceasefire violations, complaints Israeli officials acknowledged were legitimate. So Hamas's main gripe appeared to be over Israel blocking tents, mobile homes, and construction equipment from entering Gaza. According to the Middle East Eye, dozens of bulldozers and caravans entered the Egyptian side of the Rafah border crossing and are expected to be allowed into Gaza. Egyptian officials told Reuters that Israel would let heavy construction vehicles enter Gaza in exchange for a hostage release happening as scheduled, but Israeli officials denied the report. A spokesman for Netanyahu said, "There is no entry of mobile homes or heavy equipment to Gaza. There is no coordination for it." So Netanyahu's spokesman also announced that Israel hasn't begun negotiations on the second phase of the ceasefire deal. The lack of talks on the second phase is another violation of the agreement, as they were supposed to start on the 16th day of the ceasefire, which began on January 19th. The ceasefire in Gaza is still extremely fragile, as Israel bombed Gaza on Thursday after claiming a rocket was fired from inside the strip. But sources from Gaza's police force said the rocket was an unexploded Israeli ordnance that detonated while being moved. So Palestinian media reported that a 14-year-old boy was killed by the detonated ordnance. Israel claims it struck the source of the rocket launch in the Barouji refugee camp in central Gaza. According to the Palestinian news agency Wafa, a 15-year-old boy was killed by the Israeli airstrike, which was in central Gaza. Gaza's health ministry said Tuesday that Israeli forces have killed at least 92 Palestinians in Gaza since the ceasefire went into effect on January 19th. So the U.S. is also preparing sanctions on the ICC prosecutor on behalf of Israel. And last up here, concluding today's show with this, conflicting reports as Israel intends to remain in Lebanon beyond latest deadline. So this one from Jason Ditz at antiwar.com. Last night, it was reported by Israeli media that the U.S. had denied the Israeli government's request to extend its deadline for Israel to withdraw from Lebanon, which is February 18th. Less than 24 hours later, those same outlets are quoting Israeli officials who say that the U.S. has now agreed that Israel can stay. Details are conflicting in the different media accounts on the matter. What is clear is that Israel has no intention of leaving Lebanon by the deadline, and so I'm not sure what happens if that ceasefire falls apart, if Hamas tries to go back to fighting, or if Israel just tries to occupy southern Lebanon. But either way, this is bad news. All right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the show today and all of your support from, on the show this week. And just remember, Monday, we will be back with a new episode of Conflicts of Interest in the morning, and then the Kyle Anzalone show in the afternoon. Thanks, everyone.